Those who are finding themselves champing at the bit in anticipation of the upcoming remake of Resident Evil 4 can at least drink in some new Chapter 5 gameplay footage that has been doing the rounds recently. With the success of the Dead Space remake, the industry is by no means done reviving classic horror games. With RE4 and Bloober's take on the iconic Silent Hill 2 on the way, fans of games that made an impact on horror the first time round have much to look forward to. The video comes courtesy of Game Informer and shows off around 12 minutes from the remake of Resident Evil 4. Specifically, it gives a taste of Chapter 5, which is the moment several hours in where Leon Kennedy finds Ashley. We can see encounters with the villagers at night during this segment, as well as the famous cabin shootout with Carlos. As with previous teasers and images, this new footage demonstrates the much darker and moodier tone when compared to the original 2005 release. Anyone who's eagerly awaiting this remake will likely get a kick out of what's been shown off in this video. This paved the way for adding more situations to use stealth, giving players a totally different option to combat beyond running and gunning. To supplement this approach, the new bolt thrower weapon was added, which fires quiet rounds ideal for picking off foes undetected. Game directors Ampo and Kadoy hope that the other new specialized weapons, which they're keeping secret, ensure Resident Evil 4 keeps players engaged no matter how many times they play it. When they realized they couldn't put the game down themselves during development, something they also felt while developing Resident Evil 2, their early fears evaporated even more. Given the huge advancement in graphical fidelity and gameplay features with the RE engine compared to the original game in 2005, Capcom has been able to reinvent and upgrade the enemy AI. Considering that the footage shown showcased only a short portion of the game with some of the Ganados and an entirely new enemy type, fans should anticipate a plethora of surprises when it comes down to the game's release. One of the biggest surprises and major changes to the enemy's AI as showcased in new gameplay segments is the Ganado's capability to form chained attacks. This is very much unlike the original game, as it was often one attack followed up by a short period that allowed players to regather themselves and get back on the front foot. In the cabin fight alongside Luis Serra, one of the Ganado appears to be swinging constantly at the player with no breaks in between. If this is to be a consistent trait among the game's enemies, especially the overwhelming number of Ganados ready to attack Leon, then it will almost certainly make the experience far more difficult than it previously was. Consecutive attacks from enemies, if not positioned correctly, could do an extensive amount of damage, leading to a game over. This is also quite fitting, with Capcom's change of allowing players to move while aiming, so this is an adequate addition to keep players alert and on the edge of their seats. Those who are familiar with the original game's Mercenaries mode will be aware of the Super Salvador, which is an upgraded and far more aggressive version of the main game's Chainsaw Man. Rather than walk at enemies in an attempt to decapitate Leon, this Chainsaw Man swings the weapon endlessly while running toward the player. While the Resident Evil 4 remake may not have the same physical appearance in terms of height and intimidating presence, it appears as though the relentless swinging animation has been placed in the base game's Dr. Salvador. From what fans have seen, it would suggest that this Chainsaw Man will be far more vicious and aggressive than ever, and he seems a lot more desperate to put an end to the player's journey. Since there is no confirmation of Mercenaries returning this time around, there is still a chance for another version of Super Salvador, or an enhanced version, to appear beside what has already been revealed. The aforementioned change to the controls of allowing players to make movements while aiming has seemingly been accompanied by enemies also moving into attack at a faster pace. In the original, considering the lack of mobility in combat, enemies would often run at a further distance at the player, but then suddenly slow down once close enough to attack. From the released footage, enemies no longer charge and stop, but rather attack with full force and in numbers. This could possibly mean that higher difficulties, such as Professional, if still present, will be on a completely different brutal scale compared to the original. Players will not only have to think twice about always going in for melee attacks after stuns, but also ensure all corners and blind spots are covered from any incoming attacks. While the original definitely had its fair share of enemies shouting insults at Leon and some communication with one another, on this occasion, it appears to be far more common and much more menacing. Not only are some of the original and classic voice lines from the Ganados still present, but there is also constant chanting of what seems to be something related to Osmond Sadler and cult activities. This is also present in the story trailer, which gives fans a sneak peek at some of the zealot and cultist enemies performing a ritual with an unidentified female. As the game's atmosphere has been revamped to a terrifying state to truly capture the horror of the Las Plagas. This is a very suitable addition to the enemy's behavior, as it will serve its purpose of players getting the sense of abnormalities within the village. One of the unanswered questions from the released footage is whether Leon's companion during the cabin fight, Luis Serra, is capable of dying and causing a game over for players. While Luis could be seen shrugging enemies off in the original title, the remake has changed this, as it is suggested that players must help him once grabbed by a ganado. Just as enemies can now hold Leon in order for the Chainsaw Man to take him out, this could also repeat itself during the cabin fight, which includes the new enemy type. If this turns out to be as many think it will be another layer of difficulty, especially if there are now new sections that include Luis as a companion. As reported by The Gamer, Twitter user and known leaker Aesthetic Gamer 1 noticed that the remake of Resident Evil 4 will be introducing some enemies that seem to have been based on scrapped content from the original RE4. This information comes from Game Informer's recent coverage of the game, in which a female zealot and one antagonist called the Mini-Tour were revealed. Which Aesthetic Gamer 1 says are realizations of enemies that didn't make it into the 2005 release. The Eaker goes on to mention a few more that were cut from the original game and theorizes on which may make an appearance in the remake. One such example is the Hook Man from an early build of Resident Evil 4. A lot of fans of the series are already aware of this enemy, who was more of a spectral being that would have had the ability to emerge from paintings to attack Leon. The fact that they were ghostly gave this early iteration of the game more of a paranormal vibe than what fans were treated to in the final release. Unfortunately, there's no certainty that Hook Man will be in the remake, but fans can always hope. As veterans of the original will recall, the tentacles that would sprout from enemies' heads after a certain amount of damage were very deadly when in proximity. As some have suggested, the functionality of the Las Plagas may have very well been inspired by the monsters in the old-school manga Parasite the Maxim and how aggressive they were. And the Resident Evil 4 remake seems to have expanded on that even further. The upcoming title's gameplay reveals showcase far more erratic and dangerous movement of the tentacles, which could prove to be deadlier than before. Given the manner of how quickly these enemies were eliminated amid combat during the showcase, it is yet to be seen how much Capcom has expanded on this enemy design. As of now, it seems as though getting too close to tentacles is a much more dangerous move for players to make this time around. With many fans anticipating Capcom developers using scrapped enemy designs from the original game in 2005, this looks set to be the case. One of the additions to the plethora of enemies is the new Minotaur enemy wearing a cow's head, which is very similar to the original's concept art that showcased an enemy with the face of an animal sewn on. Not only do players have Dr. Salvador to deal with, but this seems to be an incredibly dangerous foe wielding a hammer that deals a great amount of damage when hit. Going by this implementation, it would be reasonable for fans to assume the same will apply to the rest of the game, and a potential appearance of the Hook Man enemy from the Resident Evil 4 beta. This will provide players who are very familiar with the original a new challenge and a test of adapting to new encounters. One of the more surprising features in the Resident Evil 4 remake is the addition of ganados requiring a ground execution in order for players to avoid a tougher battle. From the released footage, ganados that have fallen to the ground and are seemingly dead will appear to convulse, and if players are not quick to finish them off, it will result in a full plaga transformation. This also seems to occur even when they are standing after being shot without their heads exploding, as one of the ganados instantly has tentacles formed. If these enemies are able to transform fully without warning or being shot by players, it will further serve toward the scare factor and horror of players' experiences. Given the huge focus on horror on this occasion, it will be sufficient for the game's success in this region. Some of the faster and more rabid enemies in the original Resident Evil 4 were the Las Plagas infected dogs known as the Calmillos. These enemies appeared in both the journey toward saving Ashley from the church and Salazar's garden maze, giving players an encounter to remember. As fast and scary as these were, the Resident Evil 4 remake appears to have taken this to an entirely new level, with the Las Plagas tentacles forming instantaneously and moving faster and much creepier. Taking into consideration that remake will grant players the ability to move while aiming, the same has been applied to this enemy type. This should avoid encounters becoming too easy due to Leon's improved movement. While the original design is still very much present in the remake, Dr. Salvador has been made to look extremely terrifying and dangerous. Seeing the two eyes through the sandbag on the enemy's head is enough to leave fans on the edge of their seats when confronted with this enemy type. It is widely believed among many fans that the Chainsaw Man's Plaga tentacles have already been exposed. Which explains why the eyes look a lot stranger than before and why the enemy needs to avoid sunlight in order to survive. Given the fact that producers are intending to add onto what the original had to offer this time around, it could very well mean fans will finally get more lore on this enemy and the reasons behind the particular design. With the game's main characters set to have deeper levels of importance to the overarching story, it would be no surprise to see the same done with the enemies. According to Capcom, the Resident Evil 4 Remake is going to substantially revamp Ashley both as a character and as a key pillar of its gameplay loop. The remake itself is, much like the original title, centered around Leon's mission to rescue Ashley from the parasite-laden Ganado cult. Which necessarily means that her presence needs to be underlined from the start to the very end. While there's been much discussion as to how the Resident Evil 4 Remake could change Ashley for the better, the specifics were fairly murky up until now, though Capcom has finally discussed the NPC in greater detail. In a recent interview, game directors Yasuhiro Ampo and Kazunori Kadoi took some time to explain what sorts of changes players should expect in this regard. Ampo and Kadoi spoke with Game Informer's interviewer about the Resident Evil 4 Remake and its various gameplay systems. As one might expect, Ashley herself came up as a major gameplay element, and the devs admitted that there are big changes being made. "We wanted the game to change when Ashley is with you," said Ampo. Whereas players could tell Ashley to hold a position and stay back from combat in the original game, this will no longer be possible in the remake, because the goal is to make her presence known without making it outright overbearing. Notably, Capcom isn't shy about getting rid of certain elements of the 2005 release, such as shrinking, not entirely removing QTEs from the Resident Evil 4 Remake, for example. This couldn't happen with Ashley, however, and the developer said that it's made her more serious, believable, and self-reliant than she used to be. The final result should make for a more enjoyable and engaging gameplay experience, with the game itself being designed to make better use of Ashley's revamped AI. According to the RE4 digital issue of Game Informer, the remake of Resident Evil 4 will feature less QTEs, with Capcom considering these to be rather antiquated. Instead, these sections are getting switched up to better suit the current gaming zeitgeist, making them much more suitable for a horror game released for this generation. On top of this, the report also says the remake will have side quests for players to complete and will also feature breakable weapons. One of the side missions is said to involve delivering 3 snake corpses, but beyond that, there isn't much information about what Leon will be tasked with. I love quick time events, especially with the God of War series. Some games do need QTEs because it gives that cinematic feeling in the gameplay where there is no just walk, dodge, fight and repeat. QTEs gives that finishing move an extra sense of flavor at the end of a boss fight, or a dangerous situation. While there are improvements need to be made on gameplay, getting rid of QTEs, I'm not with that completely. If the remake changes too much, that could upend all the nostalgia fans have preserved since the original's release. In particular, Resident Evil 4 has a codec-style communications device that Leon S. Kennedy used to communicate with Ingrid Hunnigan, a field operations support agent. This presented a distinct screen with portrait images for the incoming and outgoing receivers, taking players out of gameplay for a moment while these faux cutscene sequences would occur. It is true that this means of communication would be somewhat outdated in a modern remake, and thus the change Capcom made to it is unsurprising. However, the change made to it is largely confusing from a design standpoint when many other games have demonstrated an easier and more fluid way to integrate voice-over comms calls. Capcom has elected to make Hunnigan's codec calls an in-game feature, comparable to when characters receive phone calls or other voice-over dialogue from characters who are not present. This change to Resident Evil 4's UI would normally be fine, but the remake awkwardly places a tiny Hunnigan comms portrait where Leon's back is usually off-centered in the middle of the screen. The portrait frame is unremarkable and small, leaving a blemish on the screen while it is apparent. This is a strange placement because many other games have elected instead to feature portrait boxes for voiceovers in the corner of the screen, or at least off to the side where they will not interrupt or obfuscate the game's other UI. Overall, This is only a small nitpick that some fans may not even see as an issue, especially when it's still favorable to the original codec. Still, when other games have implemented the same in-game comms and all they needed to do to integrate it well is place it to the side. It is strange that the Resident Evil 4 Remake slaps this portrait box in the center of the screen so glaringly. And this is my breakdown of the latest showing of the RE4 Remake footage, and I'm looking to do more after the game's release. The studio behind Dying Light 2 Stay Human is getting ready to release its next major DLC update, which is said to be even bigger than Bloody Ties and will implement other improvements as well. Going down as one of the biggest Steam games of 2022, Techland's follow-up to its 2015 zombie parkour title received good reception when it launched last February. Since then, the studio has been promising to keep the game in good condition, and so far, the team has made good on that promise. Dying Light 2 is about to celebrate its first birthday, so the developer is looking ahead to 2023 with ideas on how to keep fans happy with the state of Stay Human. With the highly anticipated Dead Island 2 not far from release, not to mention the remake of Resident Evil 4, Techland has a vested interest in keeping its head above the water in the zombie genre. Fortunately, it looks as though the Polish company has a few ideas up its sleeve, which includes the next major story-based DLC after last year's Bloody Ties. In a recent video on YouTube, franchise director Timon Smektala has been speaking about the one-year anniversary of Dying Light 2, explaining that 2022 was an incredible year for the game and how the studio has continued to make it better. As far as future updates go, Smektala says fans can look forward to improvements to the combat and parkour systems. However, what most will likely be waiting to hear about is the next expansion, which the director says should be coming before the end of the year. He says this new story content will be set in a new location, adding that those who enjoyed the first Dying Light will not be disappointed. He also says it will be bigger and more story-driven. The Dying Light 2 Bloody Ties DLC released last November. While it wasn't met with enormous praise, many people enjoyed the combat arena mechanics that took the sequel into different places in terms of gameplay. As well as the upcoming updates and content, a new patch for Dying Light 2 went live recently which tweaked the game overall and implemented support for NVIDIA's DLSS 3.0 upscaling tech. It also removed the controversial de novo DRM software, which is often blamed by PC gamers for causing performance issues. Dying Light 2 has a jam-packed roadmap for 2023, including new events, major changes to gameplay systems, a new story DLC, and more. This all celebrates Dying Light 2's first anniversary and continues Techland's promise to support the game until at least 2027. Game Rant recently spoke with Dying Light 2 franchise director Timon Smektala about the planned changes, the vision for the game, the upcoming DLC, and much, much more. Whereas Dying Light 2's Bloody Ties was an experiment and was Techland's take on an arena format, Smektala stated the next DLC will be a traditional take. There are 4 key components players can expect out of this DLC that can help form expectations. New region, open world format, narrative-driven, and focus on the infected. Smektala understandably couldn't add more, but did say that more news is on the horizon, as its release date gets closer. The goal of Dying Light 2's nighttime changes is to make it scarier and more atmospheric for players. Techland wants to bring back the fear and tension that permeated the nighttime experience of the first Dying Light, and it has a plan to do so. The big addition to that is the return of roaming volatiles from the first Dying Light, and their return means important changes to certain street and rooftop elements. What players can expect is the ability to dive deep into the streets of Infected, but still be able to walk and sneak through if they are agile enough, Smektala said. At the same time, the volatiles will be roaming the streets and looking around every corner to add to that tension. There will be some tweaks to these returning volatiles, as in they won't exactly be like the first game's monsters, but they'll be every bit as dangerous. The goal for Dying Light 2's parkour at launch was to be more accessible, and while Smektala believes Techland accomplished this, he also acknowledged that the team lost some of grounded elements and realism fans loved of the first game. Smektala also added that, if you started playing the series with Dying Light 2, it would be very hard to get back to the parkour of the first game. And while this may sound simple on paper, the reality of it is much more complex. Years of work went into the parkour system, and there is a lot more work in bringing these updates with nearly every facet of the game: programming, animation work, physics simulation, level design elements, geometry, and more. The Dying Light series appears to be alive and well, with Techland confirming its open-world survival horror franchise hit another incredible milestone, surpassing 30 million in lifetime sales. Earlier this week, Techland shared a summary of its 2022 results, framing the continued success of the Dying Light franchise as one of its top achievements in the previous year. Besides the 30 million sales figure, the series' maintained momentum is underlined by the fact that prior to its release, Dying Light 2 spent the entirety of 2021 as the most wishlisted game on Steam, as per the developer. The studio also provided an update on the Call of Juarez series, stating that its Wild West shooters sold 5 million copies since debuting in 2006. While the original Dying Light is still the best-selling game in the franchise, that may not be the case for much longer. According to an earlier statement from Techland, the original hit 20 million sales by mid-2022, some 7 years into its release. This paved the way for the sequel to debut with even greater momentum early last year, as evidenced by the fact that Dying Light 2 hit 5 million sales in its first month on the market. Based on this latest update from the developer, the game has effectively doubled that figure over the following year and is now responsible for around 1/3 of the series' lifetime sales. The long-awaited Dead Island 2 is finally set to release in April 2023. While both games have some clear differences, their rivalry has become one of the biggest in the modern gaming landscape, and Dying Light 2 simply can't lose the battle to the newcomer. The general gaming public is pretty skeptical of Dead Island 2 at the minute, and rightfully so. After being announced all the way back in 2014, it seems as though Dead Island 2 has been put through the ringer a bit, and gamers are skeptical of the final product. Gamers are unsure if Dead Island 2 can actually provide any innovations in the zombie genre, or if it's just going to feel like an outdated hack-and-slash title with modern-day graphics. That being said, Dying Light 2 shouldn't rely on Dead Island 2's potential failure. Instead, Dying Light 2 should just work off the assumption that Dead Island 2 will be great, and will overtake the waning interest in Dying Light. To combat this, Dying Light 2 should spend the next few months bombarding fans with new, high-quality content, proving that it's the better title and keeping as many fans as possible before Dead Island 2 releases. Dragon Age Dreadwolf leak shows footage of its alpha gameplay, and the reception to its content has been mixed. Plenty of studios have been the victims of recent leaks, giving fans insight into how their anticipated game is developing. However, what fans have seen so far of the Dragon Age Dreadwolf gameplay fill them with mixed confidence. The building of the fourth installment in the Dragon Age series already has a troubled past. Development for its first iteration began in 2015, but due to BioWare struggling with its other products, the then codenamed Project Joplin experienced continuous interruptions until its complete shelving in 2017. BioWare restarted the project in 2018 under the new codename Morrison, and made major changes to its original concept. The team experienced high turnover, with many BioWare veterans leaving and plenty of positions changing hands in rapid succession. Even now, leaks suggest the release of Dragon Age Dreadwolf is a long way away. The leak itself was posted on Reddit and has been removed, but many re-uploads have been circulating on various platforms since then. The short footage shows a warrior class type player character attacking Darkspawn. The UI seems very similar to Dragon Age Inquisition, and in the corner of the screen, the location is marked as Weishaupt, which Dragon Age fans will recognize as the Grey Warden headquarters. However, Insider Gaming managed to get hold of the original post that describes in further detail what the original 20-minute gameplay contained. The entire footage is set in Weishaupt, where the player character, who is an Elvish Knight class, is fighting through Darkspawn with two party members, named Rook and Davrin. Combat is shown as entirely real-time with seemingly little party management, and is said to have been inspired by God of War 4. According to the poster, the animation has been majorly improved and was described as fluid and very responsive. It was also said that the player character's hair looked glorious, as, although it was constantly clipping through the character's helmet, it still flowed with every movement beautifully. So it seems BioWare has departed from its stiff, helmet-like hairstyles. The Dragon Age Dreadwolf gameplay also showed red lyrium covering roots and various areas of the fortress, not to mention the Darkspawn themselves. with some having red lyrium powers and glowing red eyes. Many had mixed reactions to the different combat style, and how BioWare is moving away from what made Dragon Age unique back when Dragon Age Origins came out, but I'm fine with the new combat. It's still difficult to judge the leak entirely on its own merits considering it's only in the alpha stage and therefore still many details might change. As revealed by sources close to Insider Gaming, the release date of Dragon Age Dreadwolf may be further away than the previously rumored 2023 launch window. The report doesn't mention any new tentative date for Dreadwolf, but it could come out in 2024, resulting in a massive 10-year gap between its predecessor Dragon Age Inquisition. The sources also give an update on the progress BioWare has made on Dreadwolf, claiming that it still lacks features and completed voice lines, while having elements from its live service roots. According to two sources, the multiplayer aspects of Dragon Age Dreadwolf can still be seen in the current version of the game, with one making comparisons to Destiny and the Central Hub. The report states that Dragon Age Dreadwolf will involve recruiting party members and growing the main crew, who will then populate the hub and allow users to change their equipment. This sounds fairly similar to how Skyhold worked as a hub in Dragon Age Inquisition, so Dreadwolf may feature the same gameplay loop. While every baseline Dragon Age title is an RPG, there have been fairly substantial differences between them in regard to their respective tone, narrative, and approach to the core gameplay loop. Dragon Age Dreadwolf, specifically, may end up steering toward being a full-fledged action RPG, if the latest rumors concerning it are true. It seems that Dragon Age Dreadwolf is fully playable already, albeit with no firm release window available yet, and the gaming website Insider Gaming claims to have spoken to an anonymous individual who had the opportunity to spend some time with it. Initially scoped as a live-service multiplayer experience, Dreadwolf has since pivoted towards being a single-player RPG. However, the source claims that certain core gameplay elements still reminded them of Destiny. It would appear that Dreadwolf is built around a hub world from which players then launch new missions, talk with their crew, and organize their inventory. The setup, as it was described, sounds fairly similar to that of Destiny's Tower, which is a bit of a departure from Dragon Age's previous entries. Final Fantasy XV was brought up, too, with the source claiming that Dreadwolf has taken some cues from Square Enix's ARPG. More specifically, the leaker has suggested that Dreadwolf is moving away from Dragon Age games in the context of combat gameplay and that it might be more of an action-packed experience with a combat wheel UI that reminded them of FF15. The jury is still out on whether this information is true, of course, but it's a curiously specific tidbit for the source to share. The notion that Dreadwolf has pivoted away from its planned multiplayer component almost certainly has something to do with Anthem's failure as a live-service experience. Curiously, one of the critiques often directed at Dreadwolf's immediate predecessor, Dragon Age Inquisition, was that it often felt like a single-player rendition of a Dragon Age MMORPG. If Insider Gaming's source is correct, something similar may yet happen with Dreadwolf, too. As Dragon Age Dreadwolf started as a live-service game and changed its direction midway through development, it probably comes as no surprise to see BioWare take such a long time to develop the game. A 2023 release looks out of the question judging by this report, so we will probably have to wait until 2024 or even later to play Dreadwolf. The Dragon Age IP does have bigger problems than that, though. Some believe that Dragon Age has a Marvel issue in some respects, in that some of its antagonists just won't stay dead, no matter what. BioWare could very well still produce a quality RPG with Dreadwolf, of course, but even if it does, the studio's recent failures might not immediately reinvigorate its once thriving community of fans. Nintendo has released its financial results for the 9 months ended December 31, 2022, and experienced a slight dip across the board, despite healthy software and Switch OLED sales. Sales on Nintendo's own platforms overall were down 2% year-on-year, to $9.4 billion. That includes hardware, software, and accessories. On the hardware side, the base Switch sold 5.22 million units during the period, versus 11.79 million during the same period the previous year, which represents a 55.7% drop year-on-year. However, the OLED model has sold 7.69 million units versus 3.99 million the year before, a healthy 92.5% increase year-on-year. Last but not least, the Switch Lite sold 2 million units during the 9 months ended December 31, 2022, a 37% drop compared to the 3.17 million the previous year. While Nintendo acknowledged an overall decline in sales volume for hardware, it noted that diversification of motives for purchase supported sales of all three models, and that the number of annual playing users is increasing. It estimated around 112 million annual playing users from January to December 2022. The 21.3% decline in hardware sales was down to the shortage of semiconductors and other components, the platform holder further explained, which impacted production until the late summer. The Nintendo Switch has now sold 122.55 million units total since its launch in 2017, and 994.30 million copies of software. It's now surpassed software sales for the Nintendo DS, 948 million copies total since launch. It's still not reached the DS hardware figure though, with the portable console having sold 154 million units since its launch in 2004. For context, the total PS4 sales presently amount to approximately 117 million units. Prior to this global achievement, the Switch already managed to outsell the PS4 stateside. With this latest milestone, the Nintendo Switch became the third best-selling console of all time, right after the DS and PS2, whose lifetime sales sit at some 154 million and 158 million units, respectively. Making matters even more impressive is the fact that the Switch managed to achieve 120 million sales in under 6 years, which makes it the fastest-selling console to hit this mark. For context, both the PS2 and the DS were sitting at some 100 million sales each once they started reaching their 7th anniversary. While neither had the simultaneous global release that the Switch did, both were already treated to minor discounts by the time their sales figures reached 9 digits. Going back to its current financial results, software sales were down 4% year-on-year, with Nintendo highlighting that Pokémon Scarlet and Violet sold a combined 20.61 million copies. The two Pokémon titles were the fastest-selling games in Nintendo's history. Meanwhile, Splatoon 3 sold 10.13 million units, and Nintendo Switch Sports shifted 8.61 million copies. Some titles released outside of the period scrutinized continued to perform well, with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe selling another 6.3 million units, reaching a total of 52 million since launch. Kirby and the Forgotten Land also sold 3.4 million units, and Animal Crossing New Horizons shifted a further 2.9 million copies. Nintendo said in its report that unit sales of first-party software continue at the highest levels seen since the launch of Nintendo Switch. It also added that revenue related to Nintendo Switch Online increased, which in combination with overall good performances pushed digital revenue to $2.3 billion, a 21.5% increase year-on-year. During the period, 76.4% of Nintendo's sales were made overseas. Looking at a detailed breakdown, the Americas was the platform holder's main market, with 42.8% of its sales, followed by Japan at 23.6%, and Europe at 24.9%. Looking ahead, Nintendo lowered its expectations for the full year, including hardware and software sale numbers. It previously expected to shift 19 million units of hardware, which has now been revised to 18 million. In its previous financials, it had anticipated selling 210 million game copies, and is now expecting 205 million. Take-Two reported its earnings for the third quarter today, showing increased sales and net losses just like the first 2 quarters of its fiscal year, with the added disappointment of missing its own revenue and bookings forecasts. Accordingly, it also downgraded its full-year revenue projections, and cautioned investors that net losses would be deeper than previously expected. Revenue is $1.41 billion, up 56% year-over-year, but beneath the forecasted range of $1.43 billion to $1.48 billion. Full-year GAAP revenue forecast is from $5.24 billion to $5.29 billion, previously $5.4 billion to $5.51 billion in revenue. Take-Two attributed the soft sales to larger market forces at work in the holiday quarter, saying consumers focused their money toward established blockbusters and deeply discounted titles, trends that helped Take-Two's back catalog but impacted new releases. Take-Two's biggest releases for the quarter included the current-gen versions of Marvel's Midnight Suns, PGA Tour 2K23, and new Tales from the Borderlands, none of which received sales figures or cracked the company's list of largest revenue contributors. Instead, the strongest performances for Take-Two's holiday quarter came from NBA 2K23, NBA 2K22, Grand Theft Auto 5 and Online, Empires & Puzzles, Toon Blast, Rollic's hyper-casual portfolio, Red Dead Redemption 2 and Online, Words with Friends, Merge Dragons, and Toy Blast. NBA 2K23 has now sold in more than 8 million units, up more than 3 million from the previous quarter, while Grand Theft Auto 5 reached the 175 million sales mark and Red Dead Redemption 2 had a stronger than expected 4 million copies sold to finish the quarter with more than 50 million copies sold, lifetime to date. Zelnick points to macroeconomic conditions as a primary driver of the sales and bookings declines in a briefing call. "We're seeing softness in the overall market," he says. "Our titles are performing, we've gotten great review scores, we've gotten terrific critical acclaim. And one after another, we've been delivering hits into the current market. However, we are seeing softness in terms of consumer demand, particularly for console products and recurrent consumer spending related to console products." With the lowered sales and the resulting revision of the full-year forecast, Take-Two has now downgraded its financial projections for the second time in as many quarters. Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick told Jason Schreier of Bloomberg that Midnight Suns underperformed commercially, but hopes the critically praised Marvel title will have the same long tail with retailers as XCOM and Civilization. Zelnick suggested it's possible that Midnight Suns' December release window could take some blame. Midnight Suns was heavily discounted across all platforms only a month after release, in what can now be interpreted as an early indicator that sales numbers weren't as strong as anticipated. As Marvel's Avengers publisher Square Enix found out, attaching the Marvel brand name to a game doesn't automatically translate to the same kind of wild commercial success as it does with its film and television wings. Despite sluggish sales, Firaxis continues to release new content and characters. January 23 saw the release of The Good, the Bad, and the Undead, a Midnight Suns DLC pack. The content pack includes new story missions and a new playable character in fan-favorite Deadpool. Players who've purchased a season pass have a Venom-centric DLC to look forward to after that, followed by a DLC pack focused on Morbius. The final planned DLC pack will feature Storm. All DLC packs are slated for release sometime in 2023. Speaking to IGN, Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick confirmed that Judas was one of the company's 87 games that the company plans to release between the current fiscal year and fiscal year 2025. This means that Judas will be available by March 2025, barring any release date delays. Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick has been speaking to IGN about last year's Grand Theft Auto 6 leaks, referring to them as an emotional matter and adding that the company takes these things very seriously. However, while Zelnick insists that the leak hasn't had an effect on the business side of development, he says that the teams are affected in terms of it being a personal matter. The report goes on to say that Take-Two is experiencing a shortfall in earnings, which could impact the business and lead to layoffs. Zelnick responded by saying, "That's not the plan, though he admits some jobs may be lost." Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick has provided a rather tempered and level-headed take on the future of game development, now that the prevalence of AI-based tools has become too hard to ignore. As an AAA game publisher, Take-Two controls a wide variety of hugely successful franchises, one of the most notable of which is certainly the legendary trend-setting franchise, Grand Theft Auto. Considering Take-Two Interactive's importance in the industry at large, it's no big surprise that there are many eyes looking at what Strauss Zelnick thinks about emerging technologies. With AI-based tech such as ChatGPT rising in popularity, the notion that major companies may end up relying on machine learning tools for various tasks isn't a big stretch, though Zelnick does maintain a somewhat skeptical approach. As part of a recent Take-Two Interactive investor call, Strauss Zelnick was asked what he thought about the latest advances in machine learning and AI technologies, the progress of which was best illustrated not long ago, when a US politician used ChatGPT to write his speech. Zelnick responded by saying that Take-Two's game development studios should not be concerned about getting replaced by a bot that could develop video games all on its own, claiming that people will try to have AI make games, but that won't happen. Instead, Zelnick believes that machine learning implementations such as the aforementioned ChatGPT text processor AI are the way forward. We are ushering in a very exciting era of new tools, he said, explaining that AI-based assistants would allow game developers to be more efficient and creative in what they do. According to him, machine learning is about to raise the bar for game development as a whole, and creativity will be the crux of it all. Broadly speaking, Zelnick seems careful not to overhype anything just yet. He emphasized that cloud gaming is a distribution technology, not a business model, and described it as an evolution rather than a revolution of the game's business. With rumors of GTA 6 coming out in 2024, it's likely that Take-Two's next big mainstream blockbuster isn't going to have used any AI-based tools in a meaningful capacity. Yet, considering the CEO's openness to such an approach to game development, it seems all but given that machine learning will end up being leveraged in Take-Two projects sooner, rather than later. His ending statement was AI will raise the bar, but won't make a better Grand Theft Auto. Angry Birds maker Rovio has entered preliminary sale negotiations with a number of potential suitors, the studio announced Monday. The news of this development arrives weeks after Israeli gambling giant Playtika offered to buy Rovio in an all-cash deal valued at over $800 million. Founded in 2003, Rovio went on to develop and publish dozens of J2Me games before establishing itself as a mobile gaming powerhouse at the dawn of the smartphone era with the planetary success of its Angry Birds franchise. The massively popular series of physics-based games propelled Rovio to a historic initial public offering valued at $1 billion back in 2017. And although the company's valuation never reached its IPO heights, its consistent releases and non-gaming projects like the record-breaking The Angry Birds movie managed to keep it relevant in the entertainment space to this date. Following Playtika's January offer to acquire Rovio at the equivalent of $9.79 per share, the Finnish studio has now officially started non-binding discussions over a potential sale, according to its latest note to investors. Rovio says Playtika isn't the only party interested in taking over its operations, although it has yet to name any other suitors. Since no other bids for Rovio have been made public in recent times, it's plausible that Playtika's competition for acquiring the Finnish developer exclusively consists of privately held entities, as public companies generally have to be more transparent with their merger and acquisition activities. Looking at the immediate future, the sole fact that Rovio is currently considering a sale doesn't guarantee that any such deal will materialize. Not least because its decision to kickstart official negotiations with Playtika and other suitors is primarily rooted in its fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value. Either way, the Israeli developer currently seems to be leading the race to acquire the Angry Birds maker, as the 55% premium it offered in January is still cited as the baseline sale price in Rovio's latest investor note. Playtika's January bid described Rovio's game portfolio as undermonetized, with the Tel Aviv-based company positing that combining the two businesses would unlock tremendous value. What it didn't say is what a potential sale would mean for Rovio's non-gaming projects, such as the still ongoing Angry Birds animated series. Another thing that remains to be seen is whether the Finnish company manages to invite a bidding war over its properties. But either way, between Rovio's latest announcement and Microsoft's continued attempts to complete its Activision Blizzard acquisition, 2023 is shaping up to be a big year for game industry consolidations. Don't Nod has announced a new title, the narrative adventure game Harmony: The Fall of Reverie. Don't Nod, which is famous for the graphic adventure series Life is Strange, looks to play to its strengths with the new IP. The Life is Strange series is very narrative-focused, taking inspirations from David Lynch's Twin Peaks and also includes aspects of dreamlike magic abilities that would fit into a classic episode of The X-Files. Just like Twin Peaks, the series relies a lot on the interpersonal relationships and how communities are linked together. Because of this, the series also employs a heavy emphasis on player choice. Other games in the studio's catalog match this style, with titles such as Vampire and Banisher's Ghosts of New Eden straying the furthest from the studio's formula. Harmony: The Fall of Reverie is set to stick closer to the choices matter style of Life is Strange. Announced via the Nintendo Direct showcase as well as Don't Nod's official YouTube channel and website, Harmony: The Fall of Reverie boasts amazing 2D art as well as music from Lena Raine, the composer for Celeste. Set between the daily life of a Mediterranean city and the magical realm of Reverie, a land where deities live, the The player will take the role of a clairvoyant called Polly and will ultimately need to decide the fate of humanity. Launching in June this year, the game is set to have branching paths and multiple endings like Beacon Pines, a narrative game by Hiding Spot Games. While this isn't the game set in the 90s Don't Nod teased recently, Harmony The Fall of Reverie looks to play to Don't Nod's greatest strengths of narrative choice, a strong female lead, brilliant pacing, and a step into the realm of magic. In fact, instead of being set in the nostalgic recent past, Harmony The Fall of Reverie appears to be set in the near future, replete with an abundance of security cameras, holographic headsets, and a shady megacorporation making for a semi-dystopian setting. While these tropes could be seen as somewhat cliché, it makes for a good jumping-off point before diving into the more mystical journey that sees players communicate with the aspirations of humanity. Speaking of Don't Nod Entertainment, the studio behind Life is Strange and Vampire has released its first teaser image for an upcoming game. The released image has the internet abuzz with its 90s nostalgia and Life is Strange's trademark visual style. On January 27th, Don't Nod took to its official Twitter page to release a small glimpse of what its Montreal studio is working on. Released as an open job listing advertisement, the still shot shows off a scene that should trigger a massive rush of nostalgia for gamers who grew up in the 90s. In a distinctly Life is Strange style, a wood-paneled basement with cozy lighting houses a nondescript, cartridge-based game console sitting on a coffee table, its AV cords dangling off the front end of a nearby box television set. A VHS player rests below the TV set with a collection of tapes loosely arranged in a storage rack at the leftmost side of the image. Any person who spent their formative years playing Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis in their parents' basement most likely has some version of this image seared into their memory. Don't Nod recently published the 2022 story-focused RPG Gerda A Flame in Winter, but has not developed a title since 2020's Twin Mirror, which was met with mixed reviews and a sentiment from fans that the quality was not up to the bar set by the Life is Strange series. This new teaser from the studio comes to many as a declaration of returning to form, with a narrative focus seemingly honing in on its coming-of-age roots. Whether this mysterious new title will feature some supernatural twist is unclear, but it does feel like a safe bet, given Don't Nod's track record. While fans are speculating about Don't Nod's teaser image of its new game, whether it is a new entry in the Life is Strange series or something else entirely, many are patiently awaiting an official announcement. The roguelike Metroidvania game Dead Cells has finally confirmed the release date for its upcoming DLC, Return to Castlevania. The crossover with the iconic Konami series was announced late last year. It is the latest major piece of DLC for Dead Cells and will likely not be the last. Released in 2018, Dead Cells quickly became one of the biggest independent video game success stories. At the time of its release, the game was praised by critics and has sold over 5 million copies worldwide. The game went on to release a number of pieces of DLC and revealed a 2022 Dead Cells roadmap which further indicated that the game isn't going away anytime soon. Now fans finally know when its latest content will be released. Late last year, it was officially revealed that Dead Cells would be crossing over with the Castlevania franchise. A teaser trailer for the DLC, titled Return to Castlevania, was released in January which gave players a taste of what was to come. During the recent Nintendo Direct, a new trailer and release date for the DLC were unveiled. The trailer features a number of tributes to the original franchise, with music and level designs that appeared to be lifted straight from the series' classic installments. The Dead Cells Return to Castlevania DLC is currently set to be released on March 6th. Since Dead Cells originally launched, the developers have released 3 major pieces of DLC that continue the game's story. The Dead Cells Return to Castlevania DLC is said to be twice as big as previous DLCs. The various trailers tease battles with Dracula and Death, with the player character taking on the Belmont look, teaming up with Richter Belmont and Alucard, and using similar weapons as the series' protagonists. Whether the DLC manages to capture the feel of the classic games, however, remains to be seen. Other release date announcements include Sea of Stars on August 29th plus a downloadable demo today, Master Detective Archives Rain Code releasing on June 30th, Disney Illusion Island releases exclusively on the Nintendo Switch on July 28th, Octopath Traveler 2 releases February 24th with a demo launching today with progress carrying over to the game's launch. These are the announcements at the recent Nintendo Direct that interested me. The South Korean video game holding company Krafton has confirmed that it is set to open a brand new AAA studio in Canada. The studio will be called Krafton Montreal Studio and will employ 150 workers in order to develop a new IP. The studio will be led by Patrick Meth, and he will be joined by other industry veterans such as Benoit Frappier, Frederick Duroc, and Martin Paradis in this endeavor. Krafton is best known for the games developed by its subsidiary companies, PUBG Studios, and Striking Distance Studios. The latter of which is the studio responsible for developing the recent game known as the Callisto Protocol. Due to the mixed reviews which that game received upon its release, the price of the Callisto Protocol was quickly reduced on multiple digital storefronts in an act of desperation, and this in turn led to a significant dip in Krafton's share prices. Krafton Montreal Studios' first project will be titled The Bird That Drinks Tears, and will be an adaptation of a highly acclaimed series of novels that share the same title. These novels were written by Yongdu Lee, an author who is widely credited for pioneering the genres of Korean fantasy and science fiction. No word has been given yet on Lee's involvement with this adaptation of his work, however, given that he is responsible for creating elaborate worlds filled with layered, complex characters, Krafton will likely be looking to bring him on board. As fascinating as this concept of a new video game IP based on a classic series of fantasy novels sounds, it is fairly surprising that Krafton is willing and able to open up a brand new studio so soon after seeing its stock price dip dramatically. Hopefully this means that Krafton has recovered from the hit it received and can continue working on exciting new titles. Alongside the official announcement of the new studio and the project being worked on, Krafton also revealed that it has been working on the adaptation of The Bird That Drinks Tears since 2021. Patrick Meth was recently announced as head of Krafton Montreal Studio. Over the course of last week, several live service games have announced they are shutting down. These include recent launches such as the Epic Games Battle Royale Rumbleverse, but also some titles that have been around for several years like Oculus Echo VR. Even though some of the closures were planned to take place at this time, fans are understandably left wondering what this might suggest for the future of live service games. Live service games, also known as games as a service, have been on the rise for the better part of 2 decades. Unlike titles that are sold as a product with a one-time price point, games as a service add content progressively while players support development by paying a subscription fee or purchasing in-game items or cosmetics. From older titles such as World of Warcraft or League of Legends, to the more modern blueprints set by Fortnite and Genshin Impact, their success has spurred an era of growth in the number of live service games on the market. However, recent developments suggest there may be too many live service titles, and players are reacting to the glut. Babylon's Fall was highly anticipated before launch thanks to the pedigree of Platinum Games, but the action RPG ends service at the end of February, barely a year after launch. For Rumbleverse, the Battle Royale is shutting down after only 6 months. Meanwhile, first-person shooter Crossfire X announced a service closure that will be complete by May, and Back 4 Blood developer Turtle Rock Studios announced it would end development earlier this month. Even the fan-favorite dodgeball-inspired title Knockout City wasn't spared, though EA has confirmed a private server version will become available. If even Respawn Entertainment's Apex Legends Mobile or Crystal Dynamics' Marvel's Avengers can't last more than a few years, there appears to be a shift in the market away from live service games. In many cases, these closures don't make any kind of statement about quality. Knockout City managed to successfully combine dodgeball and RPG combat mechanics, and aside from Dodgeball Academia there aren't any other notable games that can say the same. The biggest flop of them all was Halo Infinite, running the franchise to the ground that spans 2 decades. Several prominent names have survived the recent wave of announcements, including Rainbow Six Siege, Warframe, Sea of Thieves, and Genshin Impact. On the surface, those titles appear to have a healthy player bases, but that can change at any point. Many are right to wonder whether their favorite games might be next on the chopping block. The success of League of Legends, Final Fantasy XIV, Fortnite, and other major live service titles created an incentive for the development of more. Over the last decade, countless titles were launched, which inflated a sort of speculative live service bubble. Speculative bubbles appear when investors unsustainably invest in a commodity, asset class, or industry, leading to a spike in value that keeps increasing until investors realize their assets aren't worth as much as they thought. When the market corrects itself to reflect what the assets are actually worth, that's often when companies declare bankruptcy and people lose their jobs. In the case of live service games, the biggest investors are players. Development studios compete over market share, but also a player's time. With more and more games on the market, not to mention general downward economic trends, many players can no longer afford to invest in ongoing experiences. The highest-earning franchises can afford to take the hit, but for brand-new IPs like Back 4 Blood that depend on their investors to break even, the prospect of no server maintenance, unpaid bills, and layoffs is tangible enough to justify pulling the plug. Fans will have to wait and see whether this means less live service development going forward, even if it takes time for studio executives to fully course-correct. For me, the less the live service games are and more single-player games, I'm all for it. And that's all for the video, guys. Like and share the video for a greater audience. Comment your thoughts on the topics, and donations are always appreciated. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon, and until then, from SMPV, it's goodbye.